about you, but it seems like every time I open Netflix, there is yet another true crime docuseries waiting for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I will binge that immediately, but it begs the question, just how many of these monsters actually live among us, and how many have actually been found? Well, look no further because I am back once again to answer all your questions with part 2 of the top 10 evil people who are currently on the loose. Coming in at number 10, the Eastbound Strangler. Back in 2006, one fateful night, this monster took the life of 4 women and was never seen from again. The Eastbound Strangler targeted 4 New Jersey escorts and left them behind the Golden Key Motel, face down, in a row, facing east and about 60 feet apart from each other. The victims were left fully clothed, minus having their socks and shoes removed, and all appeared to have been killed in the same way. Early on, there was speculation that it could have been linked to the Long Island Killer, another unknown attacker, but it was later ruled out by investigators. Despite 15 years of investigation, they have never been able to come close to any leads, and whoever was responsible has never been caught, and the $25,000 reward remains unclaimed. Next up at number 9, the Texas Killing Field. Now, what would seem like a normal 25-acre patch of land just off the highway near Houston, Texas, is actually a haunting field where more than 30 bodies have been found since the early 1970s. Nearly all of the victims found have been young women and girls, and there are apparently many more missing women from the area, but no remains beyond the 30 victims have ever been recovered. Despite the authorities' best effort, it is unknown how many perpetrators have actually contributed to this field, though it's suspected that more than one person is responsible. To date, only 3 of the cases have been successful in convicting an attacker, and the remaining 27 remain unsolved, with no leads and no luck of where to turn next. In 2011, a film entitled Texas Killing Fields was made about the series of crimes associated with the notorious plot of land, but it was not received well, and unfortunately did not kickstart anything more than upset families of the victims and a few false confessions to the atrocities. Coming in at number 8, the Flat Tire Murderer. Active between 1975 to 1976, this monster is believed to have been responsible for between 12 to 35 deaths, though the exact number is still unknown. The perpetrator got his name as allegedly he would offer to help women traveling alone who had gotten a flat tire, but unbeknownst to them, it was the attacker who had deflated their tires in the first place. While not all victims followed this exact formula, it was certainly the method for the first of his 2 victims. Bodies of the victims were found dumped into canals, while their cars were found abandoned miles away. Authorities believe the cause of their deaths to have been from drowning, and were all found with signs of being taken advantage of prior to their death. Over the years, with no culprits being found for these vicious attacks, some have suggested it could have been the work of notorious Ted Bundy, but that's merely speculation and has no evidence to back it up. For all we know, the Flat Tire Murderer remains on the loose. Coming in at number 7, the Honolulu Strangler. Credited with being responsible for the death of 5 women, this unidentified killer was active only between 1985 to 1986 and was never caught. The sadistic perpetrator was known to target women, but that seems to be where the links stop. All of his victims were brutally attacked and taken advantage of, and then left tied up on the street to be found by police. Authorities took this case very seriously, as at the time it was the first known repeat criminal of his kind in Honolulu. Local authorities put together a 27-person task force, but even with all that manpower, they were never able to find the attacker. There was hope when a man named Howard Gay was arrested, as he seemed to fit the profile, but he was eventually released after further interrogation. Years later, in 2017, the case was covered by a true crime podcast, and once again in 2022, but despite its popularity, we have no idea what happened to the Honolulu Strangler. Next up at number 6, the West Mesa Bone Collector. Back in 2009, a woman on a leisurely walk with her dog came across something peculiar, a human bone. Little did she know, she'd actually stumbled upon a major crime scene. Upon her discovery, authorities became immediately involved and discovered that it was a mass grave filled with human remains. Nicknamed the West Mesa Bone Collector, this killer was active between 2001 and 2005 and was a truly sick man. He was known to target young women, usually Hispanic, and almost always involved in late night services or with connections to the drug trade, but not exclusively, making it hard to identify just why he chose the victims he did. The thing is, during 2001 to 2005, there were reportedly more missing persons than usual, but I guess the New Mexico police didn't feel much need to dive into the disappearance of women involved in this type of work. While we know practically nothing about the killer, we do know that he is responsible for the deaths and that he would take the bodies to the desert to dispose of them. After years of police investigation, the remains of 11 women were found scattered in the deserts of Albuquerque, but the exact way they died is yet to be discovered, as medical examiners and forensic experts have not been able to identify his methods, which is very unusual. Police and FBI have never been able to track down who is responsible for ending these young women's lives, and the monster remains on the loose. Coming in at number 5, the Frankford Slasher. Between 1985 and 1990, this monster preyed upon women in a rough neighborhood in Philadelphia. The Frankford Slasher was known for being incredibly violent, mutilating the victims' bodies past recognition. What was designed to be on the inside of the body, like organs and muscle tissue, would often end up exposed, and then after having his way with the victims, he would leave them on the street, strategically posed for when the police would find them. Believed to be responsible for the death of 9 women, the Frankford Slasher targeted specifically white women, usually ladies of the night, with a public history of mental illness. But oddly, the ages of the victims ranged from 28 all the way to 68. One man, Leonard Christopher, was convicted of one of the crimes in 1990, but more happened once he was put away, causing concern that maybe they'd found the wrong man. Further, significant questions have popped up regarding the quality of evidence they used to convict Christopher. He apparently did not match witness reports of the white man seen with other victims, leaving many in fear that the Frankford Slasher remains uncaught and unidentified. Next up at number 4, the Chicago Strangler. Between 2001 to 2018, a reported 75 Chicago women all lost their lives the same way: suffocation. But it wasn't until 2019 that a task force was made to try and stop these killings from happening. Originally, authorities denied that there was any link of the crimes and denied it all being one person committing them, hence the delay in gathering a task force. But after an article from the Chicago Tribune ran in 2018, they were forced to admit that it was in fact a distinct possibility. As was uncovered in the 2018 article, there was in fact a few distinct links between the crimes. All the victims were women, all the victims were killed the same way, and nearly all the victims were black. Coincidence or not, the optics were very bad, as it seemed the authorities were not taking the death of black women seriously, and the task force was created. Then in 2021, a docuseries on Discovery Plus began streaming, and though activists were demanding answers from the Chicago Police Department, they still maintained they could neither confirm nor deny if the killings were from a repeat convict. We still have no clue who killed these women, and they still remain out in the world walking free. Next up at number 3, the I-70 killer. You wouldn't think the shopping mall off the highway would be a dangerous place to be or get a job, but in the spring of 1992, it very well could have been. 30 years ago, along the Interstate 70, or I-70, an unidentified man was responsible for the death of 6 store clerks who all had the same thing in common. They all worked in a shop off the same highway, they were all brunettes with long hair, and they were mostly all women. Except for one man, but he too had long hair and wore a ponytail, and police suspected the killer mistook him for a woman from behind. The attacker oddly didn't seem too interested in anything but taking their lives, as he rarely robbed the stores after, and if he did, he would maybe take $100. After one of the attacks, a customer actually walked in the store and caught him, the 2 victims on the floor, and the attacker still with the weapon in his hand. But fearing for his life, he ran away as fast as he could, and in shock, didn't call the authorities until nearly an hour later. well after the man had escaped the scene. A few years later, in 1994 Texas, 2 similar attacks took place, and then again in 2001 Indiana. The cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and Dark Minds, but the man has never been caught and remains walking among us to this day. Coming in at number 2, Hercules. While some say killer, others say vigilante. This perpetrator separates themselves from the rest. The distinction between Hercules and, say, the Frankford Slasher? Well, Hercules only attacks those who have already committed a brutal crime. Or rather, one very specific brutal crime, taking advantage of women. In 2019, 3 men were found in Bangladesh, each shot and each with a note tied around their neck. While not identical, all the notes followed the same structure. First stating the name of the victim whose neck the note was wrapped around, followed by the name of the victim who they had attacked. It would then explain that this was the fate of those who committed this crime and that others should beware. Signed, Hercules. Law enforcement has yet to uncover who is responsible for these deaths, but have no clue if the killings are by one person or a group of people. It sure has sparked debate, with many questioning who the real bad guy is here. And last up today at number 1, Pedro Lopez. Nicknamed the Monster of Andes, Pedro Lopez might be one of the most notorious criminals alive. After being kicked out of his childhood home at just 8 years old for taking advantage of his younger sister, Lopez was evicted and sent to live the rest of his childhood on the streets of Colombia. According to Lopez, not long after he was thrown out, he was abducted and assaulted, and then by 13 was taken in by a family, but after 2 years ran away. By 1978, Lopez claims to have been responsible for the death of 100. That same year, an indigenous tribe caught him and was going to execute him, but a nearby missionary took pity on him and demanded they release him and call him into the authorities. The police, however, for whatever reason, promptly released him from custody. From there, he fled to Colombia once again, followed by Ecuador, where he reports to have attacked about 3 girls a week, and when he was caught and arrested in 1980, he confessed to killing 200 victims, but there's suspicion that it could have been worse, as many as 360. Though he did remain jailed for 14 years, in 1994 he was released from prison for good behavior and sent back to Colombia to serve the rest of his sentence in a psychiatric facility. But only 4 years later, in 1998, he was ruled legally sane and released on a $50 bail. Rather predictably, he fled the country after his release, and a warrant for his arrest was promptly released. His whereabouts remain a mystery, and no one knows if he has committed any more attacks since he vanished. Well, there you have it. As always, thanks for watching. I'm Kennedy, and be sure to click that subscribe button. See you next time.